Greetings, stranger. Welcome back to the River Andoshen. We'll be travelling northwards for the next several days at a lazy pace. The route winds eastwards for many miles before looping back west. Eventually, our barge will bring us to the small town of Riverford, an agricultural community known for its cattle and graveyards. But all in good time. For now, I thought we might consult our mutual friend, the Encyclopaedia Galarianensis. The information contained within its pages makes them feel denser somehow, yet all the book's wisdom is useless to the one who has not taken the chance to read its counselling words, or alternatively, the opportunity to listen to its words being channeled through one more familiar with the tome. That's where I come in. Today I think I will tell you about one of the most common incorporeal undead, the sinister Shadow. They may have become the punchline for many necromancers in the Arcanumirium, but I promise you that in the wilderness, these wispy beings of darkness are not to be underestimated. Their very touch will quickly purge you of your essence and leave behind only a withered husk, a shadow of your former self, if you will. So stay a while on the deck as we leave Albus behind, and let me tell you about shadows, where to find them, how to identify them, and most importantly, how to destroy them. Shadows hold a unique role in the undead ecosystem because they function often more as stains on a twilight world than as autonomous entities. Considerable debate continues to rage ever on in academic circles regarding their true natures, but all agree that they are the quintessential incorporeal undead. This means that they are created from the soul-corrupting influence of the void, also known as the negative plane. It also means that their bodies are not physical in form and can pass through solid objects as readily as we stride over land. A shadow's appearance is somewhat arbitrary, for it is contingent on many factors, most notably the light level and how much nourishment sustains it. However, generally speaking, a shadow manifests itself as a wispy, ink-black blotch against its environment. It hovers over the ground and flies through the air, unlike any other being, including any other incorporeal creature, because it prefers to do so by slinking along solid surfaces and coalescing itself into dark places. Thus, while your ideal shadow, as depicted here, is what you may see in a white, well-lit void with no solid surfaces, in reality you are more likely to see them only as, well, shadows, being cast by no living entities. Indeed, this might be the best way of thinking about shadows. They are those incorporeal remnants of life that cast themselves into existence to feed on others' vitality. Like vampires, they are driven by a lust for the life essence of others. But unlike vampires, they do not desire or require blood as a medium through which to drain it. Instead, shadows are capable of feeding on vitality through the lightest touch. Their voracious appetite for this energy is almost enough to drain completely a typical humanoid in seconds, a prospect that is made even more terrifying by the Shadow Hand's side effects. When a creature's life essence is siphoned by the touch of a shadow's hand, it does more than simply enfeeble the target, it actually begins to animate their own shadow. If enough of someone's vitality is claimed by the shadow in this way, then the victim's own shadow is stolen, as we say, and it rises off the ground as an imperfect but very real secondary creation. While the target lives, this newborn shadow spawn remains a dangerous but quite clumsy entity, unnaturally tethered to the River of Souls by its living progenitor. But should the poor soul perish in the encounter, then this bond is broken, and the spawn immediately discovers that it has transformed into a true shadow, furthering the cycle. Over time, therefore, shadows accumulate in nests as more and more victims succumb to their groping hands, each encountering a greater threat than the last. It does not help that, being undead and incorporeal, shadows require neither food, nor drink, nor air, nor rest, and they seldom relocate from their spawning places unless they perceive it too far from humanoid souls. Shadows can feed on non-humanoids, but they rarely do so unless in self-defense, for the act of feeding is unnecessary for their continued existence. They are simply driven to relish in the destruction of that life which their progenitors previously enjoyed. While all shadows enjoy these powers and can reproduce in this way, some benefit from even broader skills. Some can become one with the darkness that normally serves them only as a cloak, and can slink instantly between two dimmed points over short distances. Some can take on other forms, like wolves or snakes, though precisely why they choose to do this or what benefit it brings them is not known. Some know malice so intimately that they can force their wills onto physical objects, hurling them across rooms or blowing open doors through unnatural breezes. And some exceptionally powerful variants can even seek to possess living bodies, taking control of them for periods just long enough to savor the memory of life, before inevitably being ejected and flying into an obstinate rage at their own pitiful existence in consequence. If you encounter any of these shadows, you must be doubly wary. So, how can you defeat a shadow? Being incorporeal, they are resistant to all physical wounds and traditional energy sources, unless a weapon ruined with ghost touch enchantments is the one delivering them. Generic magical enhancements will make violence more potent against shadows, but it will rarely prove sufficient. Being undead, shadows are further immune to exposure to the void. Indeed, this will make them even more powerful. Thus, we must target their vulnerabilities to stand a chance in combat. Shadows can be injured through pure force damage, naturally. Moreover, like almost all undead, they are freely wounded by the light of the positive plane, bypassing all resistances. However, shadows also possess a third atypical weakness. Not only are they susceptible to the light of creation's forge, they are also vulnerable to light in general. Now be careful with this, because to exploit it properly you must ensure that they are exposed to magical light. A trivial cantrip will be enough, but it must be magical. Shadows find natural light repellent, and certainly they find it harder to hide and disguise themselves in daylight than in darkness, but this is not enough to expose them to conventional weaponry. Cast magical light onto your weapons, though, and you will find that even the humblest blade can pierce them more easily. Be warned, this vulnerability will not remove their resistances, only reduce them. I still recommend positive energy or the ghost touch rune above all else when dealing with shadows. Nevertheless, should you find yourself wanting, magical light will serve as a suitable substitute. As a side note, I find it interesting that this is essentially a role reversal of vampires' relationship to light sources. Vampires' weaknesses are more nuanced than shadows, but generally the fanged horrors can tolerate magical light, and indeed some prefer it to torchlight, for example, but all are weakened and eventually destroyed by exposure to direct sunlight. Do not confuse the two weaknesses unless you want to meet Pharasma's judges early. Now, you may be asking what the relationship between capital S shadows and lowercase s shadows is. After all, if shadows are undead creatures, how can shadow spawn come to exist before their host has actually died? And if they reproduce themselves, how did the first one form? Well, if you really want to engage with experts on the matter, I suggest you return to Absalom and make your way to the Arcanumirium, or even the College of Mysteries, whose scholars will happily debate you until you die of old age on this matter. If, on the other hand, you consult the Encyclopaedia Galalienensis, you will find a most satisfying answer under the ghost entry. Simply put, you must remember that shadows are not spirits. Spirits, including but not limited to ghosts, are those incorporeal undead whose souls have lingered past their welcome, resisted the call of the River of Souls through sheer determination or rage, and manifested themselves once more, often as ethereal parodies of their former living selves. On the other hand, shadows are wispy remnants. Think of them perhaps as an incorporeal equivalent to zombies or skeletons. They are undead because they cannot be created spontaneously from nothing. They do need a foundation of living vitality to subvert and corrupt. However, the victim who died so that the shadow could be spawned has been spared a tortuous entrapment. Be reassured that shadows are no more than echoes, and the souls who catalyzed them move on unharmed. I must acknowledge that some people disagree with this assessment. They point to shadows being able to speak Necril, and to some, seemingly, being capable of accessing the memories and even, rarely, the personalities of their progenitors. Some even claim that once a shadow has fed on enough essence, it can transport itself into the abyss and become an Invidiac, that is, a shadow demon. This is so absurd that it pains me even to mention it. It violates so many planar and metaphysical principles that I am convinced the person who came up with it was high on Kiss at the time. Regardless, the former claims are true enough, but I do not think this is sufficient proof to call shadows true spirits. They can access some elementary emotions from their progenitors, but to claim that this makes them one and the same is like claiming that kneading dough into the shape of a rolling pin creates a second. Shadows are fickle and cruel in nature. Do not fall for their deceits, even if they do. This is why a shadow spawn can exist before its victim has died. The two beings are both weakened, remember, and should the target recover, the spawn dies instead. As for the second question, there are two other ways to bring forth a shadow with no duplication. The first is a straightforward ritual of shadow creation. This is part of the family of rituals collectively known as the rituals of undead creation, but do be aware that each is distinct and you cannot learn a single procedure that enables the creation of any undead entity, similar to the ritual of planar binding we discussed last night. I will not comment on this ritual beyond saying that it necessitates the slaying of a living being, and therefore is always considered an act of evil, even if the target was somehow willing. The second method, on the other hand, requires naught but the natural death of a petty soul. At the end of a long life in service of greed, malice, gluttony, or some other sin in the eyes of Pharasma, a shadow may arise spontaneously, not long after the responsible soul departs for the boneyard. Their progenitors are rarely noteworthy, for the deaths of tyrants and world-shaping conquerors, if they trigger undead at all, are likely to be far more powerful than a simple shadow. But the cruel orphan master, the unpalatable factory foreman, and the greedy businessman are all good candidates for this occurrence. This happens seldom, I must stress, and there is no reliable way of ensuring it, so there is little else to add other than to acknowledge that this is probably how the first shadow arose. A final thing to note is the existence of greater shadows. These are not separate entities, but rather old monsters that have accrued many victims' essences over long years lurking in darkness, or beings spawned in the shadow plane itself to be infused with its nefarious energy. Greater shadows are more resilient in every way than their lesser kin, and their resistances are thus even more difficult to overpower. Even the lightest brush of an uncurled finger against the cheek of your average human would be enough to leave them slain on the spot, a new-spawned shadow lurking in their place. Even more worrisome, for the average adventurer at least, is their ability to create complete and unnatural darkness at will, meaning they are much more willing to travel and hunt than their brethren. So paradoxically, if you encounter a shadow in an unexpected place, like a forest clearing or an open meadow, you must exercise extreme caution, for it is unlikely to be overmastered with ease. Only weaker shadows are relegated to dark tombs. Well, stranger, I hope you are now more aware of your own shadow, especially in dark places. My final word of advice is to beware natural corridors underground. Shadows are known to reach little more than a spectral handout from a wall to grope at your vitality. Then yank it back before you have time to react. Lure them out and purge them quickly. But for now, come and enjoy the sun and the rain and the daylight on our river cruise, now that you know it causes no harm to shadows. I will let you know when we are approaching something worthy of exposition. Well, until then.